KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan, the gold mine in Moriarty. Dagan, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
You always go in a direction I'm not expecting. I really always throw a curveball. I never know.
Yeah, I never know what to say. Sometimes it's going to be a character. Sometimes it's going to be some sort of referential, gold mining, somewhat of a reference.
Makes sense.
To the Ninja Scroll. I go in directions that I often don't expect as well. It's good to be here with you. So what's going on in your life? What's catching up a little bit? How's everything going? How do you feel?
How do you
et cetera.
Well, this is a perfect time to do my my only impression. The only impression I could do. How does it feel to be on your end? Literally the only impression I could do. Not well. I didn't say I did it well.
It's pretty good.
Not bad.
It is well. That's an older one. I mean, that's one you've broken out.
That's been a while since I've broken out Bob. But I was thinking about food, man. I was thinking about you too, because I haven't talked to you about this in a little while, but you and I historically were on the same wavelength with this as far as eating habits during the day. Like, it occurred to me, I really don't eat anything at all until like 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm just not hungry. And it's sort of a domino effect because, as you and I have discussed many times, and I think you're still the same way, I get hungrier the more the day wears on. So in the evening into the night, I'm a night owl anyway. And for some reason, just as the day progresses, I get hungrier. Morning, not at all. Not hungry. Just never hungry. Going out to breakfast is never a great thing for me because I'm never really feeling it, And then, so 2:30, I pretty much force myself. I'm getting a little hungry, but I force myself to eat something because if it gets any later towards dinner, I won't want to eat dinner, right? So I make myself a sandwich or a bowl of cereal. If I have to go through the motions in the AM hours, it's just like drudgery. I'm just like choking down a bowl of cereal. I'm not really hungry. But then dinner time, great. Satiated for a little while. And then even after dinner, an hour or two, I get hungry until that hunger just keeps ramping up until I go to sleep. And I usually go to sleep pretty late, certainly in the AM hours, anywhere between 12 and 3 a.m. But I eat so much at night. It never stops. It's like a snowball effect, right? So in the morning, I wouldn't be hungry because I ate so much the night before. But I realize it's probably not healthy for my metabolism. I'm getting a little older now, in my early 30s, right? So I have to start. I'm not in my 20s anymore, Kyle. So I just think I have to see if I could find a way, like if I could just hold off eating at night, especially late at night, maybe I will be hungry in the morning. I don't know for a fact. I don't even know how interesting this is to discuss, but this is what's on my mind. You asked for it.
I'm going
to do a little experiment where I cut it off. Like, let's say I stop eating anything, like no chips, cheese and crackers, whatever I eat at night, right? My nuke like a microwave burrito, could be an all-out meal, leftovers, whatever. Nachos. Sure. I know you're a big nachos guy. Stop at 10. Let's say I go to bed at 1:30. Will that have an effect? Rather than eating until 2 in the, watching Curb Your Enthusiasm and eating, stuffing my face until literally I lay down on the pillow. It's like stuff your face, brush your teeth, lay down. It's 2 a.m. Got to stop. And you know what? Watching things plays a big part too. If I'm not watching a show or a movie or something, I'll be less likely to eat. Like maybe be a little more productive at night. Right? I don't know.
You got to show
a little bit. What do you think about all this?
Well, first of all, I'm in the same boat as you, and I always feel like it's a shame because breakfast food is so fine.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so fine. At French toast and eggs and pancakes and bacon, it's all good stuff. But I don't get hungry either. Like the idea of me eating when I wake up is nauseating.
Oh,
like,
it's the worst.
It's like, I don't mind hungry. What the hell are you talking? And then there are people that like wake up and they're famished. Like,
like
Micah wakes up and like she has to eat.
Yes.
And I'm like, what? It's so I believe them. It's just so foreign to me because it's not the way I operate. But
no,
I'm pretty much on the. So Ramon was just here for a couple days.
Oh, he already came.
Yeah, he was here and he just left. I just put him in an Uber
Ramon.
right before we started recording.
Nice.
Ramon. And so the last couple of days I've been a little thrown off. We've been drinking and eating a little bit more freely and stuff. But typically I don't eat anything until 7:30 or 8 at night.
Holy shit, all day?
Yeah, I go all day until 7:30 or 8.
Wow.
And then I eat a massive meal.
Right.
Like I feast. Like Micah cooks Micah cooks.
And really
and
right,
so
she cooks.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Right, she cooks. And then I always make things I love making things into sandwiches. I always reduce things into sandwiches. So it's like, fried chicken, sandwich, pork chops, sandwich. Obviously burgers
Smart
and beef,
boy.
meatloaf, all that kind of stuff, sandwich. And then I just take the cheese and like rolls and mayonnaise or whatever you need. And I make sandwiches and then we eat fries or I eat a ton of rice.
Okay.
Like, which is horrible for you, white rice. I love white rice.
So good though.
Like love white rice. And, a vegetable on the side usually. And then I'll gorge myself. I'll usually have like 2 or 3 helpings of whatever we're eating. Probably at least 2,000 calories of food, if not more.
So you're getting
and
the
then
calories.
And then I drink like a can of Pepsi or 2 during this time as well. And then I shut it all down. That's it. That's the end.
That's it till the next day at 7, 8 o'clock.
Right. Now, I would say half the time I'll keep the window open for like another hour and then I'll have like some cashews or cookies or something.
Yeah, a snack.
But the window is the eating window. If the eating window in my life on a normal day is open more than 90 minutes to 2 hours, that's really bizarre. And then I just don't eat calories for 22 to 23 hours in any way.
That's amazing.
That's the way it's called OMAD. I've talked about it a ton. I'm sure people are tired of hearing about it.
Yeah.
I really live and die by this because it feeds into it. Here's what it does. I'm not hungry to do like, when they say like eat breakfast, it's really important, eat lunch or whatever. I'm like, I'm not hungry.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't have to worry about that.
No.
I love food. Everyone loves food, but I love to eat and I'm not going to watch what I eat.
Yeah.
So I think part of what dieting, like why people break when they diet is like, I got to watch what I eat and do this. And I'm like, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to eat whatever I want once a day. And then I'm going to blast my ass on a fucking elliptical for 45 minutes.
So you're exercising now.
And
this is key.
Yeah. So I'm actually working a little backwards because Ramon was here today. This is usually the last thing in the day I would do is record. This is like the first thing I'm doing, actually. I still have to work out. But typically I lift and I do my elliptical and all of that. And so the whole mixture is to try to keep myself from becoming obese without having to make any major choices.
Yeah.
About like the choice I've made is like, okay, I'll eat whatever I want and I don't have to have anything else before that.
That is so...
Like I don't have to snack, I don't have to graze, no lunch, no cheating.
No cheating, like, okay.
And I don't drink coffee. I don't.
That's the thing. You don't even drink coffee, so it's like you have nothing.
Just water.
Water until that meal.
Right, and then and you know what the other thing is I look forward to it and I work towards that meal. It's funny. Like when I was in college, I used to. I'm a man who likes to reward myself at the end of something. I've always put a carrot at the end of the stick for myself. Yeah. And often in college, and it used to be like, smoke a joint, smoke a blunt. And I literally used to, like, before I did my homework, or like sometimes I'd like roll a blunt and I'd like leave it in the bathroom on like the ledge of the with a lighter on the bathtub. And then I would sit and do my work, and like that was the reward. And I would like carefully write my papers and get everything organized and go to the library to print things or whatever. And then when I got home, I was like, that's done. And I would just, because we had to hide the smell of it, I would always smoke in the shower. And so I would just get right into the shower and just smoke my blunt.
That was your treat.
And right.
Yeah.
And so meals, like my big meal that's like my treat for like, did you exercise? Because if I didn't exercise, if I take that rare day off, I feel guilty that I took that day off. So I rarely take a day off from working out.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know how well it's working.
You look amazing. I don't think you've ever looked better. I mean, you just look healthy. We talked about it. When did we talk about this? Oh, on the Generation Kill episode, like the physique, like having a physique of like a Marine, but some of the dudes are really buff, but some of them just looked fit. You know what I mean? Like you look like you could fit in like to me, like a Marine platoon. Like you wouldn't look strange.
You heard it here.
Right?
That's right.
You would just blend right in with those dudes. You wouldn't be the most buff dude.
No.
But like me, I'm too thin for that. You know what I mean? I wouldn't fit in really well with those dudes. I mean, you have a foolproof plan and it works for you. My only question is later on, and I love the reward system or the payoff where it's like time to eat, enjoy yourself, maybe talk to Micah, decompression time, take time away from work or away from the screen, especially you. But the only caveat I could see, and maybe it's not even an issue, is later on as the afternoon wears away to, evening, 5, 6 o'clock, 4, 5, 6 o'clock, do you find yourself getting hungry and having to hold off then?
Yeah, I start getting anxious. I start really looking forward to it.
Okay.
Like it's true. Like I try to kind of time things so that I'm actively doing things like in the hours leading up to like 4, 5, 6. Like I try to not be sedentary at that time, because that is like when I'll rarely bend and be like, all right, I'm just gonna have a few cashews or something.
Yes.
If I can make it to like 6 or 6:30, then I'm like, oh,
you're already
fine.
there.
Yeah, and then but I do admit that life revolves around that 7:30 hour.
I like it
in a lot of ways.
I like that. That's a proper way of doing things. This way you have something to look forward to built into your day. Very smart. I think that's a lesson for everybody out there, I think.
It is a lesson. I appreciate that. All right, Dake.
Ready?
Let's talk about the topic at hand today.
All right.
We're into the things you're selecting again, which is fun. And you selected the 1993 animated film Ninja Scroll.
Woo!
And I watched it. Actually, Ramon and I watched it last night. I took notes.
Did you guys watch it?
And yeah. Because I was like, I have to, I'm like, I need to fit this in somewhere. So I don't know if you're interested. I'll just do it when you go to bed or whatever. And he was interested.
Quick watch.
Yeah, it was 90 minutes. So it was on Hulu. It's the only place I could find it. Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. I'm sure you have some story about that. But so you were asking me if I remembered this film, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
Because I was like, Ninja Scroll. I know the name. I know it was a popular anime, but you were like, I'm going to be curious if you remember watching this, and I do. And I think what I remember about it is actually you and I watching this a couple of times, and you knowing when when the bad stuff was coming and that I shouldn't watch it. And so
true. You were young.
Yeah. So to see some of and it wasn't the violence, but more of the sex, and to see the movie in its entirety and kind of grasp onto those memories, I was like, oh, I don't know that I've seen this movie in its totality, because it was one of those things that was kind of like a little much for me at that age. And I also just recall that for me watching it, and I'm like, I know that there's so much perverse anime and manga and stuff out there, but I'm not exposed to it outside of people just joking about it. So it's like kind of interesting to see like an anime chick's tits, or to see something really dark and visceral like rape or something portrayed in anime and all of that. So it was a really interesting watch. But I also say this is like, I don't really know what this movie is about. Like I was trying hard to pay attention to it, and I don't really get it. Like I know what it was about, but I was constantly confused. I feel like by the end I was just watching, like, I guess I'm just going now. I don't really know what's happening here. So that was kind of my first impression of it, and I think it's beautiful too. And I want to talk obviously about that. But why did you want to select this particular film as you started to write out your new compilation of topic ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we were due for an animation topic. I feel like maybe the last animation topic we did might have been Into the Spider-Verse, and that was a little while ago. So I wanted to, in just curating the new list, which we put together our KnockBack list through to like the middle of January of 2022 now. So I wanted to throw in some animation topics, and of course, we do the Disney stuff, do feature films, some more contemporary stuff. We do the Studio Ghibli stuff, which is like a band apart for me. And we're going to do another Ghibli film. I think our next one might be Howl's Moving Castle. I think I added it later on in the fall to this list.
Yeah, it's in the list. Yeah.
But I wanted to do another animated film and see if I could grab something that was of interest, but maybe something that we could introduce to some of our viewers. I was very interested to see if you would remember it, because this was deep in my pretty early anime rotation, as far as like going to the conventions in the early to mid 90s, getting the OAVs. I have a great story about how I got this movie actually. And a lot of people really consider this one of the 3 sort of gateway films for Western would-be anime fans. And, in fact, like, if you think of this film as like a gateway film in the mid to early 90s, when anime was still a relatively underground thing, there were 3 sort of properties, 3 happened to be anime films that sort of were those sort of ambassadors from East to West. And it was Akira, of course, which we've talked about, Ghost in the Shell, Shiro's Ghost in the Shell film, which we haven't done yet, but it's another formative anime film, a must-see. And I would round out that trio with Ninja Scroll. It was one of those films that put anime on a lot of people's radar in the mid-90s. Now, it came out theatrically in Japan in 93, but a lot of people were turned on to anime through films like this because I feel like just via a little bit of the sex and violence and sensationalism, same thing with Akira and same thing with Ghost in the Shell. Whether you have a samurai, traditional feudal Japan type samurai story, or whether you have something in the cyberpunk genre, I think all 3 of those films not only are a cut above in terms of quality and maybe story and depth and all that kind of stuff, but they're also sensationalism, chock full of sensationalism with sex and violence. So definitely scores points in that regard. And that, makes it appeal to people. It sort of piques people's interest. And I remember this, this film was on my radar very early. I saw pirated copies when it was right out of the theater. But this was definitely one of those films when I finally got to art school that this was like, I saw people sort of in their formative throes of becoming anime fans. And it started with this film and a few other things. And I would argue there were other films. Neo Tokyo was one, which also has to do with this filmmaker. Robot Carnival, Appleseed, maybe Battle Angel Alita. There were other formative films that were sort of, basically put anime on people's radar, but this was a big one. And when I was we talk about this a little bit in our, when anime was underground episode, which is a very early episode of KnockBack, maybe our 2nd or 3rd episode, as far as I
it's remember. Like in the first 5, I would say, definitely.
Yeah. When I was going to comic book conventions, and there was this guy, Bruno, he specialized in selling pirated anime. So you would go to his table. He had some manga. He had some art books from Japan. He had some toys and tchotchkes, maybe some model kits, buttons and posters, stuff like that. But he specialized in selling bootleg animation tapes, sometimes TV series, sometimes OAV, sometimes feature films. He had everything from like the most obscure OAV all the way through Studio Ghibli films, right? And everything was $30 a pop. So he would dump 2 VHS from Laserdisc wherever possible. So the quality was usually high. He usually used like very consistent, like Pioneer or JVC VHS tapes, but everything was $30 a pop. Whether it was a 20-minute OAV episode of something, let's say Bubblegum Crisis, or a full-on feature film like Akira or a Studio Ghibli flick. So, or, an episode of Dominion Tank Police might have been 22 minutes. Everything was $30. So there was one day early on, now knowing this film came out in Japan in June of 93, I believe. And I left for art school in February of 94. So I knew I had to get this specific bootlegged pirated tape somewhere in there. So it was probably the fall of 93. And I went to the convention one day. I would go every month. It was far from us on Long Island, all the way out in like Rockville Center, which is like, you might as well go to Manhattan. It was super far west on the island. And me and my friend Pat would go every month. We would see Bruno. He'd have new stuff every time. And I actually found how I did it back then was there was a Western anime publication called Animag, which was out of Canada. And it was sort of a Western fan anime magazine, very early, very rag-like and kind of cheap production, but very passionate. This woman, Trish Ledoux, was the editor of that magazine. And that's how I would get privy to things that were English language back then. But if I was feeling particularly feisty, I would go to New York, I would go to like Chinatown, and I would get Japanese anime magazines like New Type, and I would see what was coming out in Japan at the time, contemporarily. So I might be a month or two behind or something. but I had never seen anything about Ninja Scroll. And I went to the convention one day and I was looking for an OAV anime that I knew had just come out based on the NES game Ninja Gaiden, interestingly enough, which was called, I think it was a short little 3-parter called Ninja Ryu Kenden. And it was based on the first Ninja Gaiden game, I think. I was really interested in it. And I went looking for that and he had it and I got episode 1. And Bruno or his son, I forget who said to me, but he was like, dude, if you like ninjas, you have to see this movie. I had no idea what it was. And it was called Jubei Ninpocho, which they called it the Wind Ninja Chronicles, but I think the accurate translation turned out to be Jubei the Wind Ninja. And so I knew it as the Wind Ninja Chronicles. It was written there on the label with Sharpie, just like, meticulously written like he did everything. And I was like, I think what appealed to me was that it was a feature film. And I was like, all right, because I would go with $100. I would walk away with 3 VHS tapes. That's it. And they were usually 3 episodes of something. So, an hour and a half worth of content. The fact that
I'm sorry, quick dig. I just want to say that's so much money.
Oh, it was ridiculous.
And, that's a lot of money now, but that in $100,
I spent all my money on that, basically.
It's what I keep saying about games too. Like, we just have so much better access. Imagine spending
oh my god
$100 on something
it's
like
so
that.
funny,
even today, it's absurd. It's absurd. I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No, not at all.
Say that.
Not at all. But it's true. Like, people my age, Gen X anime fans, think back fondly to that time, and it was cool because so much of the stuff there was mystique back then, right? We talk about that
Definitely.
all the time. But the cost was not a fond remembrance. Right. So I think what was particularly appealing to me was like, all right, I'm going to get this feature. These guys seem to have good taste. They never really made a bad take. And I think they might have said to me too, like, if you don't like it next month, just like exchange it for an episode of Angel Cop or something that you like, But everything back then was an experiment because maybe you had a blurb in Animag or you saw something in New Type, which you could see the pictures, but you couldn't understand what was written there. Obviously, it was all in Japanese. So everything was sort of trial by fire back then. It was like, all right, maybe I'll spend $30 on this. It might suck. But mostly it was just the allure of getting any kind of anime back then. It was magical, So I got this thing home. And of course, I fell in love with it. It reminded me very much of something like Akira. And I think I might have saw Ghost in the Shell after this, but something that was a cut above in terms of quality. It was cinematic. You could tell it had a bigger budget than most OAVs or direct-to-TV episodic series that you would see. And, it was all on a whim. It was all on a recommendation. Who knew how I would find out about it later on? Now, Manga Entertainment took it and put it on video and DVD later. That's what I watched here. I have the DVD here. I really wanted to show you guys the VHS but I can't find my box of bootleg VHS. They're somewhere, but I can't find them. But so that's how it started with me, Kyle. And then, I remember getting to school. It was other art-centric nerds, animation nerds, anime nerds, and they were, so it was like I was in good company. A lot of people were into this film, so I was kind of thrust into this community of people coming from all over now in Philly of just, would be, future animators and anime fans and stuff like that. So we kind of bonded over this film. I had roommates that we would watch it, every weekend. They would get stoned or high or do tabs vast or whatever and watch it. And, it's nice too because the other 2 movies that you think about in the same breath, in Ghost in the Shell and Akira, again, are cyberpunk, futuristic, urban settings. This is a feudal Japanese take on that same sort of level of almost similar level of quality, not quite as high, but
definitely.
So and I really wanted to see what you thought of it, and everything you said, your sentiments really ring true with me because I have to say, in watching it the last couple of times over the last 2 weeks, I understand so much more than I ever did, and that was because I really did a deep dive as far as like finding out exactly what this meant and how much of it was based on this particular novel or feudal Japan historical characters, how much of it was made up and how much of it was cut out of the film. Cause the running time's just short of an hour and hour and a half.
It's an hour and a half about, yeah. It's 93 minutes.
So, so I really want to get into it with you and see what you thought. And, it's also kind of a departure for me because I'm not really like a big sex and violence type of guy. But I don't think that's what appealed to me about it. I think what appealed to me about it was the ninja, feudal Japan, samurai, wandering swordsman type of element that we are, that was already on our radars from things like Storm Shadow and G.I. Joe and Ninja Turtles. And growing up a Gen Xer in New York with WRTV, Channel 9, sort of Shaw Brothers Kung Fu blocks every weekend, and then that playing into just Wu-Tang Clan and discovering martial arts films, and later on with Jet Li and the big budget things like Hero and Crouching Tiger and House of Flying Daggers and all those things. So this was just like really in my wheelhouse, just as far as like ninja, samurai. I love that shit. I love that it's like kind of a grounded film, but deals a little bit with the mystical elements and ninja magic and all that kind of stuff. So let's break it down, my friend.
Yeah, let's do it. I think what was interesting to me about this, and it's always interesting to me about ninja fiction, let's say, and kind of us coming up at a time when this was really entering its own in the West, is I've always been fascinated by how attractive they are, and of course how, I guess, crestfallen I was when I learned that ninja are really not very cool in history. They're considered like shitty, maybe talented, but kind of like shitty, cowardly samurai type people that do things in the dark. And
sure,
I'm curious in Japanese culture when, and I don't know enough about it, but when that kind of more realistic image of the ninja as an assassination squad or people that would do traps and just things that were not honorable, but needed to be done, like when they kind of seized control of that and made it into this other thing. And like the way we see it now,
sure.
And how the word ninja when I was a kid was all I needed to see. I mean, ninja, anything ninja. And that's why it's so funny with that Fortnite player, Ninja. It's like, how did you even get that name? Like, I feel like that name is just, no one is ninja.
Isn't that's just, how did he do that?
Yeah. It's like, it's very strange, but I wonder what's attractive to you about that, about the whole iconography of the ninja. And, we've talked about our love of ninja stars in the past and how we used to throw them and at the back fence in the backyard, and we used to run around with our fake swords, and there's just something that's always been very attractive about it. We loved Edge in Final Fantasy IV, and we obviously loved Ninja Gaiden and, like you said, Storm Shadow. So what is it about the ninja that is so attractive to you, and what is it that's so powerful to this day about it? We still are very attracted to the ninja clad in black with the katana and walking mystically through the fog.
Our generations grew up just being so attracted to that. The coolness, the mystique. I think the first thing you have to start with is the aesthetic. I mean, it just looks cool. Black robes, the mask, maybe, mysterious, not speaking, wielding all these amazing weapons. I think there's definitely a Western fascination looking into the East, that it seems so different than our culture. There's definitely a fascination there with Eastern culture from looking from a Western perspective, and shurikens and swords, and then, chain weapons and ninja magic, summoning things, disappearing, smoke bombs. Like it's like a childhood dream come true, all wrapped in one thing. Like there's different things when you're a kid, right? Robots are fascinating. I guess in the old days it was soldiers and cowboys and stuff. You have different things, dragons, right? Maybe fantasy type heroes. But for me, the ninja is just the coolest and the most fascinating and the most mysterious. And the fact that you, even as a kid, you don't know much yet, but you know that these things, these characters, these people were based in history. And before you realize what the difference is, you grow up and you kind of get educated and you realize the difference between the shogun and feudal Japan and what the difference between a samurai and a ninja is and all that kind of stuff. You're kind of just lumping it all together. It's like Usagi Yojimbo and Ninja Turtles and Storm Shadow and American ninja movies and, looking at, whatever Hong Kong cinema was on your radar at that time, and Sho Kosagi and all these guys. Like everything was just wrapped up into one. It didn't matter if it was live action or a comic book or animated. Ninjas are just badass, and ninjas sold. I figure it was like, looking back, it was like sex sells, violence sells. Ninjas just sold. You saw like a really badass thing like Storm Shadow or a dollar store shitty ninja. It didn't matter. It was a ninja. A ninja play set with plastic swords and shurikens, and then getting older.
Totally,
and getting
man.
Stuff from Chinatown, like real weapons. Like fascinating. I wouldn't trade it.
It's funny too, because I always looked at, samurai are cool, but I always looked at samurai when I was a kid being like, these guys suck. I don't want anything to do with who the hell are these guys? But as you get older and learn, you're like, no, those are like the knights of that society. They're the exact opposite of suck.
Exactly.
And they also, I think, would destroy ninja in a like a one-on-one battle, historically speaking.
Sure.
But I only took a couple of Japanese history classes at Northeastern, and I don't know much about it. I mean, even just reading a little bit about Ninja Scroll, because some of the stuff they were saying, I'm like, this takes place in like the 17th or 18th century in my mind. And then I went and looked, and I was right. It's somewhere in there. I don't know exactly when, but it is. I do want to ask you about this, because you were talking about, as we get kind of deeper into the actual film itself, you were talking about the accessibility of this film and the importance of this film to finding new audiences. And Brian Lau wrote into us. And of course, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia for early ad-free access to the show.
Yo, Brian.
And submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas, etc. He says, hey, Super Mario Moriarty bros, this was a movie that got me into anime as a 13-year-old chibi whippersnapper. The violence and art were completely different from anything I've seen on Saturday mornings. In your opinion, how influential do you think this movie was in bringing a new audience to anime? So I'm curious, do you think it's more important than something like Akira or Ghost in the Shell? Because when I look at that trifecta of movies you brought up, this seems to be the least important. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but from that perspective, I mean, how important was it in comparison to its contemporaries that I feel like you hear more about? I mean, at least I do. Ghost in the Shell became huge in the 90s.
Of course.
And Akira obviously was and is a seminal film. So I wonder, was there something specific about this film that was either more or less influential than those? And do you agree that it's maybe the least of those three films as far as its influence, or is that wrong?
Yeah, no, I think I'm right there with you. I would order this, if I had to order it, Akira was of obviously the utmost importance. And a lot of us saw that by the time the 90s rolled around. By 88, 89, we were already seeing that. Ghost in the Shell, interestingly enough, of the trifecta came last for a lot of us, because I think Ghost in the Shell got its brief theatrical release in the States, in North America, in 96, I want to say. So a lot of people were turned on to that film last, which is interesting. But I think there's a lot of interesting points to this conversation, because each of those three things are widely regarded, again, as, the gateway for Western audiences to discover anime. I think one part of that was people, just in terms of quality, like, it has a more Disney-esque, if you will, level of quality than the typical OAV that you might have gotten, Ixer or Bubblegum Crisis or, Gal Force or any Dominion, any of those things that you were watching back then. Obviously, it was a cut above in terms of quality. Even the best TV or OAV thing didn't have this kind of budget behind it. And it's important to say, Ninja Scroll was sort of funded by a triumvirate of three huge companies: JVC, Toho Movie Theater, movie studio, and Movic, which was like a big anime licensee company. So much like Akira, it had corporations backing it financially. It didn't do well in Japan as its theatrical release. But the biggest thing to note is Akira was done by a visionary named Katsuhiro Otomo, right? Ghost in the Shell, Masamune Shiro. And Ninja Scroll was directed and penned by another historical anime legend named Yoshiaki Kawajiri, who a lot of people would know from other things that he did: Vampire D Bloodlust, Wicked City. But Ninja Scroll was the thing that put Kawajiri on the map. He's still alive. I believe he's still working. He has an animation list as long as your arm, dating back to like the late 60s as a lead animator, before he started directing in the mid 80s, I think, with the Lensman movie. But he's one of those anime gods, basically. And so, though, having the backing of a famous animation director, also one of the co-founders of Madhouse. I'm wearing my Madhouse shirt today. One of the 4 founding members of Madhouse who animated this movie. One of probably the film that put Madhouse on the map in terms of quality and in terms of like a force to be reckoned with in terms of creating very high quality anime. But yeah, I think there's sort of a conflagration of factors that make this the smallest. One, it didn't do well in Japan. They couldn't even get a sequel off the ground because nobody would back it financially. And two, I think because it is the lowest budget of those three films, I think if you look at something amazing, absolutely timeless, like Akira, and even the first Ghost in the Shell movie, which is gorgeously done, huge budgets, Ninja Scroll doesn't have that level of craftsmanship. Not quite that level. It has other things. It has beautiful scenery and pastoral forests and bamboo forests and fireflies and running water. It has things that the other films don't have in terms of scenery, in terms of graphical imagery. But I think it is the lowest in terms of overall quality. It's not quite a Studio Ghibli film. You could see there's some really showcased, highly gorgeously rendered action scenes, but so you could see where the B team came in and did some of the slower scenes, some of the dialogue scenes, cutaways and stuff like that. So I just think in terms of quality, it doesn't quite reach the benchmark of the other two, but I think it was formative for a lot of the same reasons as those other two, just the graphic imagery, sex, violence. Again, I think it started, these three films in particular were the things that sort of brought in a new way of thinking, a new Eastern way of thinking with animation, where animation was largely considered, into the early to mid 90s, kids' fare and children's fare, where in Japan it hadn't been like that for many years. This started to usher in a whole new way of thinking where it was like people started to realize that animation there were other genres, and it didn't just have to be for kids, and started to, usher in a sea change with that way of thinking. But Ninja Scroll was definitely one of those things where it was, and, people just wanted to watch it. It was like it had the same allure as a horror movie, where there was going to be a body count and there was going to be blood and gore on screen and sex and boobs and all that kind of stuff. Things that a lot of people in the West hadn't seen in animation, maybe for years, since maybe heavy metal or something like that, or maybe missed that whole thing completely and didn't really realize or think of animation in that way, where this was kind of a thing where it was like, all right, animation could be for adults too. Animation could be for teenagers. Animation could deal with these sort of topics. It could be just, it could be treated the same as live action. And that's what Ninja Scroll, Akira, Ghost in the Shell, a few other things that were heavies in the marketplace, or in, that came from the East into the West and made people see, kind of opened people's eyes a little bit.
What was it? I don't know if you have any insight into this. You probably do, but why didn't it do well in Japan? What was it about this film that didn't resonate with audiences there? Because this seems, and I was remarking that as we were watching it, I'm like, this seems so profoundly Japanese that I would imagine that this is a movie that maybe they took a second look at later and realized, I guess, how important and how high quality it is. But it felt so uniquely Japanese to me. And do you know anything about why it wasn't well received?
I mean, it's interesting if you think about, I would just find this, this subject matter, this specific historical era in Japan, these characters sort of mystifying the whole, basically Eastern sword and sorcery, right? That's basically what ninjutsu is, right? You got ninja magic and mystical elements paired with a grounded sort of martial arts, fighting with weapons, fighting with your hands, things that went on with that certain period, historical period in Japan. So I would find that endlessly fascinating no matter where you're from. It's almost like, think about it akin to the Civil War or the Revolutionary War if you're an American, right? Those, or World War II. As Americans, those were stories set, with Americans, by Americans. It was a period in our history, but we find it endlessly fascinating. Where I would think the same thing if I was Japanese. I would assume that stuff would be equally as fascinating. But maybe that's what it was. Maybe it just didn't have that sort of fascination or allure behind it, or didn't seem, it felt too familiar. Where it's like, if you think of something like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, you're dealing with cyberpunk, you're dealing with fantasy, futuristic elements. It's more of a fairy tale. Where This maybe it just hits a little too close to home, where it's like, all right, we've heard about samurai. we see that architecture when we go out to the countryside. We see what a pagoda looks like. We see, we know the history of swords, what the inside of these houses look like, all that kind of stuff, even if it was hundreds of years ago. So maybe it was just that where it was like, and anime was in a real, if you do think about the mid to late 80s, I would say dating all the way back to the 70s, I would argue, but mid to late 80s into the early 90s, anime was in a real sci-fi mode where that was what was popular. Giant robots, spaceships, battleships, things set in space, good versus evil set amongst the stars, very Star Wars-esque. Female protagonist, which this film does have a female protagonist, but you could argue that the main protagonist is the male, is Kibagame Jubei. So, maybe it had all that working against it. It could be my own. I don't even know what the sales figures were or how long it lasted in the theaters in Japan. I couldn't even find that information, but apparently...
I looked briefly too. I couldn't find the box office stuff.
The biggest thing, or the biggest factor that came out of all this was they couldn't fund a sequel. For many years, they couldn't get a sequel film off the ground, even someone as powerful or sought after as Kawajiri. And I think the 13-part TV series came even 10 years later, which I've never seen. I think it debuted in 2003. It sort of continues the adventures of Jubei, from what I understand, but I haven't seen it. Obviously, a lot lower budget. And then, apparently there's other factors like Leo DiCaprio's production company was trying to get a live action adaptation off the ground for many years, and it kind of got caught in movie hell and all that kind of stuff, and could have got hung up with the script and financial backing and all that kind of stuff. But it's weird because I guess that initial lack of financial revenue or making back money was sort of the bugaboo that sort of cursed this film or cursed this entity as a franchise and said, kind of stopped it in its tracks, which maybe is a good thing. Maybe that's why we're still talking about it, because it was never really, they never beat it into the ground.
Well said. Well said. All right, so let's get into some of the movie itself here. I wanted to start with Dai Win, who wrote in and said, "Hey, gentlemen. I think that it's interesting that a femme fatale like Kagero dispatches her enemies indirectly via sexual touch. What do you think this movie was trying to explore by having Kagero kill any man, good or bad, that has sexual contact with her?" And of course, this is going to come up, so I'll just read Dan Patterson as well. He says, "Hey, Brothers Moriarty, I know that Ninja Scroll is held in high regard by many, but I have to say the impression it left on me was disturbing. I believe I saw this movie for the first and only time when I was around 11 or 12. One of my friends had rented it from Blockbuster, and I sat down excitedly to watch an anime I believe to be an action movie about ninjas. I remember nothing about this movie except one scene, the rape scene. I believe this was the first time I had seen something like this graphic in anime, and it turned me off to the whole movie. I'm curious for how this scene impacted you when you first saw it. Also curious how old you were when you first saw it." So we talked a little bit about that. We're going to get into that scene and the sexuality that pervades this movie generally, but what do you make about the sexuality, specifically with what Dai was saying about the femme fatale, and is there something about that the movie's trying to tell you about? Is there some message, deeper message with the woman that kills with sex and all of that, or is it just the employment of cool, of just a cool way to interact with fiction in some way?
It's a good question. I don't know if I ever thought of Kagero that way.
Device, let's call it.
Yeah. I will say, I was 19, obviously, when I saw this film the first time. But if I was your age, Kyle, or maybe a little older, like some of our listeners so far, around the 13-year-old, I definitely would have been fascinated. I probably would have tried to see it if I had a big brother type in my life. But I think it would have definitely disturbed me at that age, particularly the violence. I mean, the fight with Tessai in the beginning, where he's just massacring the entire ninja clan with his weapon, and they're just getting split in half and shit like that. It's pretty visceral. It's pretty hardcore stuff. I know anime has come a long way, and there's been much worse since then. But for an earlier anime, and of course we had things like Fist of the North Star and excessive violence, almost cartoonish levels of violence. But this really, for a film, was Akira did the same thing. Maybe to a slightly lesser degree. But the Kagero character is interesting because I love the irony behind this character and the tragedy behind this character, that she's not only is she a female ninja, so she's pretty fascinating because you don't see that a lot. I think in anime, before Ninja Scroll, we had a few things like Dagger of Kamui, right, which centered largely on a female ninja protagonist, and then later on we got big ninja franchises like Naruto and stuff like that. But this was pretty fascinating to see a female ninja, and not only that, but the fact that one of her powers or one of her uses, basically her function in this clan, was as a poison taster to make sure food wasn't poisoned and then to identify poisons. And the fact that she's immune to poison, but she's also poisonous. Like, you basically can't touch her, and she certainly can't have physical relations with a man, with people. She can't have physical relationships. So already you feel, and her attitude reflects that of somebody who you could see never knows that she'll never feel what love is, which is pretty insane thing. It definitely elicits our sympathy for the character, the fact that she's such a hard ass, but you understand why her attitude is that way. She's basically robbed of like a basic life function. And the fact that she's so instrumental to the longevity of this clan and her function as a poison, her rare power to be able to identify and taste poisons without dying. But the fact that she's toxic. She's literally toxic. You can't touch her. So I love that. I mean, it's such a simple idea, but it's such a grounding idea for a film. It makes her a really fascinating character, and you really want to see how things are going to end up with this character. The fact that the rape scene is so graphic it borders on mean-spirited, because this girl is already like, this woman has already endured so much, but also I love the fact that she's basically murdering you when you're trying to take advantage of her, and of course factors into Jubei's survival, because he might have never beat Tessai if Tessai didn't rape Kagero, right? So that's interesting. Good storytelling.
It is good storytelling. It's what I was because I think that was the first time I had seen that scene. That certainly didn't even really know that it happened. And I was like, wow, this is really graphic. And you're not going to see a real person in real life that's built like Juggernaut or something. So you're not going to be able to see that. But I was like, wow, you would never see this sort of representation of rape in a real movie, I don't think, or a real TV show quite this viscerally. And so I think it's designed to elicit horror and shock. I think that's the entire idea. And in fact, a lot of the sexuality that runs through the film is quite interesting, because there's like a lot of things where like they imply that like they're fingering this girl at one time, and like they're doing, it's like, not to be perverse, but that it's like, wow, like what the fuck is going on here? It's not
pretty sick.
It is. It's very, and like even just a little off comments that they have constantly about like, isn't she, whatever. They're always like saying something about her. It's I think from my perspective, I feel like it's designed to elicit that level of discomfort. And why would it be comfortable to watch a woman be raped? I mean, so of course, if you're gonna have that portrayed in animation, then it's gonna be a little startling and a little stunning. And I love that character. It's Tessai, right? Yeah, this is
the stone guy.
Yeah, this is the guy that I really wanted to ask you about that. Well, I'll let the late Nate bring it up here, because just the enemies generally in this movie, I want to get into this chicken or the egg fiasco that I have in my own mind.
Okay.
He says, hey, my favorite pair of brothers, whose last name starts with an M, Ninja Scroll is considered one of the most influential pieces of anime from the 90s. But I wanted to ask about the series, what series you believe to take direct influence from it. For myself, I most identify its influence in an anime from my childhood, Inuyasha. However, I'm willing to admit it may be because I saw it at a young age. Apparently, the composer for Ninja Scroll, Kaoru Wada, was also the composer for Inuyasha. So maybe that's why I find them similar. I always love to hear you and Dagan discuss animation. He actually says just Dagan, so that's fine. I'm curious. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about, I guess, some of the design influence, and the chicken and the egg situation I've been having here is just that this movie, I said it constantly. I think I was annoying everyone. I'm like, this is a video game. This is a video game. This is a video game.
Absolutely.
This is a video game. It's a video game. It's a video game. It's a video game. And then Micah brought up a really good point where she's like, well, is it? or are video games influenced by stuff like this? And I was like, that's an interesting point, especially because I'm fascinated by that, the fact that you brought up Ninja Gaiden specifically, because the weird mystical bad guy that you see in the purple, he reminds me of Jakio from Ninja Gaiden, the bad guy in the first Ninja Gaiden game.
Oh, the guy with the claw.
How terrifying how terrified I was of that. Like, they show him, like, there's like these weird scenes where they splice it in, almost Exorcist like.
He was scary.
Where you see
Jakio.
and it's scary. So, but it brought up this quandary in me about the things that this movie influenced, or what influenced this movie, and this chicken and egg situation about, well, which came first? Because we identify this as video gamey. You have 8 enemies and 8 enemy lieutenants with their special skills, and you have to travel all around and fight them in any perceived order. And it's a fucking video game, but I just don't know if that's a fair assessment. So what do you think about what influenced this movie, what this movie influenced, and what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because there's just no denying to me that this is an archetype type movie for a video game. And I mean, shit, Deathloop, when we're recording this, just came to PS5, and it's about running around an island killing 8 people before time runs out. I mean,
really?
Yeah. So to say that this is video gaming is to say, to put it the very least touch on it.
Oh,
what do you think about that, and that the chicken and the egg kind of situation I find myself in as I try to identify the influences?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it feels very video game like. I have that written in my notes too. I mean, in fact, the 8 Devils of Kimon, who we are employed by this Shogun of the Dark, this mystical Shogun of the Dark, I think they're more interesting than the main protagonist, and even maybe the main 3 protagonists outside of Kagero, maybe, where, you have Jubei, you have your main protagonist, and for me, he's, you got this former ninja, now turned solitary wandering swordsman for hire, apparently, essentially a Ronin, undertakes mission for pay, and no one lord or master, not beholden to anybody. And we know he was once a ninja, and we know he's courageous and skillful and virtuous. Turns out he's a pretty selfless dude. Clever. We find out very early on in the opening minutes that he's a man of modest means. He doesn't ask for much. He only asks for enough from whoever's hiring him to survive, to get food, to get rice balls or whatever. He's not, the other mercenaries are like, we're going to do this job for 300 gold. What the fuck are you doing? He's like, I'm doing it for 20 gold. Like, I just need to eat type of thing, He doesn't really, he's interesting because Jubei is not a protagonist with any tangible flaws that we could see. He's just a fun surrogate for the audience to go along. We're rooting for him because he's a good guy. He's just a good guy. Not only is he a badass that channels wind through his sword, but he's just a good guy. He's like an Indiana Jones type, really. And that makes him fun, but I'm not sure how interesting he is. You're rooting for him. You like him. But I think the 8 Devils of Kimon, where it gets interesting, because now you have these bad guys, and it does, Kyle, you're absolutely right. It plays like a video game. You have these 7 unique mini boss fights, each with a very different and distinct enemy, each enemy with a very distinctive power. And that's leading to a final big boss fight, and very video game like in that that confrontation, everything's leading to this final, it ends here kind of scenario, this once and for all settling of some long-standing bad blood between the main protagonist, and the main antagonist, who you only meet really in action, at least much later on. So, and I think it's built really on, now this story we talked about it earlier, we opened up with this in the conversation, where there's a historical feudal Japanese setting. There's political intrigue. There's political infighting. There's a backstory of clans fighting each other. This clan, who's essentially this evil clan, trying to procure gold so they could buy weapons from Spain so they could essentially take over the country, is really what's going on. And then there's a shogun spy who's trying to stop them behind the scenes, and there's a wandering swordsman and a poisonous ninja chick, and it's pretty multifaceted. But essentially, it really is just a video game. The good guy has to get through these 7 bad guys so he can get to the main bad guy and kill him. And I think if you're looking at this movie came out in 93, maybe they were working on it for 3 years. That means they started in 1990. That already 8-bit into 16-bit typical video game action franchise built in. Do a level, get to the level, beat a boss, get to level 2, beat that boss. That was already instilled in video game culture. Right. We already knew that going into 1990. So this film seems to be taking a page out of the way video games were traditionally built, if that makes sense to you.
Sure, it absolutely does. And Orochi News Team wrote in a little bit about the villains too. He said, Konnichiwa Brothers Moriarty,
Konnichiwa.
Ninja Scroll, Masterclass showcase of 90s anime features. Kawajiri Yoshiaki is a treasure of storytelling and has his hand in many of the genre's most beloved projects.
Oh, yes.
In Ninja Scroll, I adored all unique characters. Both the protagonists and villains had me on the edge of my seat. The 8 Devils of Kimon might be the ensemble of some of the greatest and most dangerous villains. As a teen, I got my hands on the VHS in 95. Me and a friend watched it several times in awe of the animations, the action sequences, sounds, art style, sex, and gore. I was no stranger to any of it, but Ninja Scroll in its day definitely pushed the limits. Which villain did you guys like the most? So I'm curious which of these 8 we have. Genma Hamuro, the leader, got his Jay Leno chin. We have Tasai, who we see early on. Then we have Benisato, who's the snake lady. We have Mushizo, who's the awkward looking hornet person. We have Mujuro, who's the blind sword fighter. We have Shijima, who's kind of like the shadowy creature. Yurimaru, who has that cool string that he uses. And then Zakoro, who's the chick that revives the deceased. So I have a lot of love for all of these characters. And I must say that the 2 characters to me, Dig, that stood out the most is I love Yurimaru, simply just the string, how they're like coming out of his... there's like some weird mystical thing about it. And then he like casts the lightning spell or whatever and electrifies them. But my favorite is definitely Shijima. I just love the way they represent him. That seemed to be the most video gamey, like when he creates like all of the copies of himself or whatever. It was super cool. Felt like Gemini Man or something like that in Mega Man. And I liked that interstitial splice in the beginning with his face. It felt very dark, very Exorcist horror movie like.
Yes.
He brought an interesting level to that. So out of these villains, which are the ones that stand out to you most?
I like as a group how dynamically different they are. It's proper writing, proper character design, grouping of a group of enemies that are really different. They each wield a different power, and there's a lot of mysticism behind what they could do, paired with the traditional ninjutsu. I love the fact that they're ninja. Like, that's a ninja clan. Like, that's what a ninja is. That's crazy. I like how this film tells us like a ninja could be a lot of different things. It could be Jubei, it could be Genma, it could be that army of ninjas that Jubei's running through at the end, traditional brown-clad ninjas jumping from rooftop to rooftop, or they could be these demons, and they could all have these very diverse set of skills. I like Shijima, the purple guy, who I think is killed 5th out of the 8 of them, because he's an interesting character, because not only does he last a while, he lives through a couple of different confrontations with Jubei, but he's also maybe the most OP of the entire team. He has a lot of powers if you think about it, right? He could do a lot. He wields that huge multi-bladed metallic claw that he could fire off chains. So he has that really formidable physical weapon. And then he could create copies of himself. He sort of manipulates shadow and seems to be able to kind of traverse matter. Like he could blend into shadow, he could sink into the ground, he could blend into stone, all that kind of stuff. And that power that you discussed, where he could kind of possess and manipulate the dead to his ends, like control them like zombies somehow. Super cool. But this character does a lot. And I love the physical look of this character too. The Tessei character, the guy who we see Jubei take on first, the stone-skinned guy, is interesting because he's physically one of the coolest characters. So it's interesting that Jubei takes care of him first, because I would have liked to seen Tessei last a little longer. And I love that whole confrontation. It's one of my favorite scenes in the film, where he's in that hut and he's taking advantage of Kagero, and Jubei's just sitting there in the shadows until he's just sitting there with his sword on his shoulder, and Tessai notices him. He's like, "Get the fuck out of here!" And Jubei's like basically confronting him. And we see how fearless this guy is, and the fact that Jubei did not need to get involved in this. He was basically, again, that selfless. From when you meet Jubei very early on, you already like him because there's no reason he had to become embroiled with these monsters, and he does.
Right, and he also embarrasses that one guy saying, I don't need to charge more than what these people have. I can't charge 300 Rio or whatever for.
Exactly.
You already kind of get that vibe from him, and that, like you said, he's just trying to get by.
Yeah,
in some way.
He's just a consummate good guy. You don't even really see anything. There's not really any even tragic flaws with him or character.
I mean, before he even knows the thing with Kagero too, like she throws herself at him, and
yes,
and he refuses too.
As a cure.
And I think, right, exactly. Yeah.
Which is so cool. I like. It's interesting to have a character like that because I feel like nowadays, even 20 years later, you would probably try to impart some sort of humanizing character trait into Jubei to make him, that seems to be the trend in storytelling where it's like you can't have the perfect character. There's a little bit of gray in everybody, but not in Jubei. And that, again, that harkens back to some of our heroes, right? Luke Skywalker, I think of Indiana Jones, like people that you just want to root for in a popcorn movie type of way. That's what I love about Jubei. And the fact that he's paired against these fucking monsters. I mean, I think that's one of like the rape scene, as graphic and as seemingly mean-spirited as it is, which you see a lot in entertainment, specifically in anime, I would say especially over the last decade. But I think a function of that is to show, like, he's up against some fucking bad dudes. Like, these are devils, on Earth, basically. Like, these are demons. And, so it's this good guy up against these irredeemably bad guys. So when Jubei's wrecking shop, you know what I mean? You could really get behind him. It's an unapologetic. You don't have to feel bad for when he slays these guys one by one, which is really interesting. But I love them all for different reasons. I don't know if you want to go through each one, but
sure, let's do it. Yeah, so we talked about Tessai a little bit. Let's go to Benisato, who's the second one that dies. Snake Lady, what do you think of her?
It's an interesting fight because we don't get, even though Benisato comes back for 2 fights, we don't get a lot of her. We know that this character has an army of snakes at her command, right? She commands an army of snakes. She also has some mystical powers to cast spells or send her opponent into a trance. Something by manipulating the snake tattoos on her body. And she basically gets the better of Jubei. He's bathing in the hot spring. She's in the mist. I love the scene where he's talking to her, but he's moving his sword. So he's picking his sword up slowly as he's talking with her. It's so cool. Like you can see his sword moving in the foreground. Like, oh, what the fuck is this person?
There's a lot of, by the way, just in that regard, there's a lot of what you wouldn't necessarily call humor, but there's a lot of that in this film where there's a lot of just sneaky, funny. I don't know what it is. Like little nods. You constantly are getting nodded at. Like little things that are happening in the foreground or whatever. Yeah.
It's kind of his personality. Like he's kind of oddly lighthearted about stuff. I don't know if it's because he's confident in his abilities. Like when Jubei's facing those mercenaries, those guns for hire on the bridge in the beginning of the movie, he seems to be acting like he knows that they're outmatched. Like the average bear is not going to be enough to bring it, even if Jubei's outnumbered. He knows that, because of the power that he wields and his skill, that these guys can't really get the better of him. In fact, he vanquishes them without being overly violent. He doesn't go out of his way to murder that last dude. You know what I mean? He's just defending himself. And when he's pitted, it's interesting when he's pitted against, he seems to bring that same personality into facing these devils because I think partially because he doesn't know what he's up against. It's a little more than what he's used to. But also because he just has that sort of personality of maybe, he brings that confidence in. Like maybe he hasn't really faced anyone that's his match. Maybe maybe this is a whole learning thing for him where it's like now he's kind of facing, he's facing people that are a formidable opponent, that make a formidable opponent for him. But, you know, I love the fact of the Benisato fight because she really does get the better of him. He's falling into her trance. And Dakwon comes with the poison shuriken and sort of snap, not only to poison Jubei, but also having a second function to snap him out of it. So he could, you know, so Jubei could essentially fight back. And then we see Benisato could flee a fight via shedding her skin like a snake, which was interesting. And then later on, he does, you know, it's the same thing where she forms that giant monster out of her snakes. But again, showing how powerful these characters are. The same thing with the Tessai fight, where if Tessai wasn't poisoned by Kagero, would Jubei be able to beat Tessai? I don't know. I really don't know. It seemed like it was going to be a proper showdown until, of course, Tessai started shedding his stone skin. He was poisoned, essentially, by the toxic female ninja. So, and almost every fight, there's something that allows Jubei to gain the upper hand besides just his skill. Like he seems like he's extremely lucky in combat. Like something happens to assist him, which we'll talk about with almost every enemy, I think.
Well, with this next one I wanted to bring up, which is, and we brought him up earlier, obviously Mushizo. I wanted to work in this comment we have from Worst Fanboy Ever on Patreon. He says, "Greetings, Moriarty brothers. I am very excited to see that you are looking back at one of the all-time great Japanese anime movies. Ninja Scroll, for me, it is right up there with the likes of Akira, Vampire Hunter D, and Ghost in the Shell. I am really looking forward to hearing what Dagan has to say about the art and animation from his perspective as a professional animator, as well as the story behind how you first discovered the movie. Growing up in South Dakota, I unfortunately did not have access to a lot of anime until I was building my DVD collection for my newly acquired PS2 in 2001. My question for both of you, taking into consideration that you recently played Metal Gear Solid 2, what kind of influence do you think Ninja Scroll and especially the Eight Devils of Kimon may have had on the likes of Hideo Kojima and other Japanese video game developers in creating their own unique cast of characters and villains? I can't help but draw a direct correlation to Kojima characters like Vulcan Raven, Vamp, and The Pain. Thank you for all of the amazing Last Stand content." So,
well said.
I was bringing this up specifically because I agree, and we had gone into this. But when I saw Mushizo, I was like, that reminds me of the Hornet character from Metal Gear Solid 3. I mean, it
forgot about that.
And you had just brought up like how he's always seems to be fighting with like a level of luck and getting a little bit of help in Jubei. And I was thinking like that's kind of like Fortune in Metal Gear. So
yes.
Do you see that connection, and do you think that this had some sort of influence on Kojima? I would imagine that it had to have. They in the light of Ninja Scroll, Metal Gear Solid villains seem like these same Kimon devil type groups.
Sure.
So do you think that there's some sort of connection there? And do you see the connection specifically with Mushizo? And is it The Pain? That is the guy with the Hornets, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I forgot all about that
villain.
Connection. Now I'm excited to get there because I just started the game last night, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, The Pain, that's right. So yeah.
It's interesting. I love the fact the Mushizo fight might be the only one where Jubei is not afforded some outside help or luck. I think he might straight up beat Mushizo. But I love the point of this cast of villains seeming like a very Kojima-esque band of baddies, right? Yeah. Because it feels like Kojima because they're sort of mystical in nature, but also there's a grounding. Right? They're not too crazy. It's like, okay, a character that controls an army of snakes, a character that controls a contingent of insects to do his bidding. It's interesting. It's believable. It's still believable in this feudal Japanese setting, years ago, in the past. It's not futuristic in any way. And Mushizo is interesting because he looks like this hunched old dude, but it turns out that it's a giant wasp nest in his back. And of course, he possesses the ability to control the army of wasps, but he also fights with that really cool weapon, sort of that barbed pitchfork. It's not really a trident because it doesn't have the middle piece. And then, of course, he has that hidden throat dagger where Mushizo seems a little bit underwhelming compared to the rest of the devils. Mm-hmm. It seems like he would be the one where Jubei could just take care of him on his own type of thing. But Jubei also gets lucky because he's trying to flee the wasps and he jumps into the water and then maybe not realizing that, that was actually a good move. Again, maybe luck played a part. And then Kagero, of course, we see some of her ninja magic where she fires the poppy leaves and the pollen out of her sleeve in order to subdue the insects until Jubei could figure out how to beat this dude or whatever. So and I love the fact that, like, again, like you see this in the Tessai fight, but you see Jubei wielding, sort of harnessing the wind power in his sword, which basically extends his sword slash. Again, very video game-esque, where he basically fires a blast from his sword, right? Think of Link from
right.
Adventures of Link, Zelda 2.
Yep.
So it's like a thing where he could fire his blade up and basically cuts his leg off. He does the same thing to Shijima later on. But that, it's a cool fight. And then he falls in the water and they have their little duel. And of course, Muchizo is done in by the wasp sort of coming out of his body, trying to escape the water and just being kind of run through by his own little minions, which is ironic. But it's fun. It's fun. It's super fun. I love it.
Let's see here about Majuro. Let's go to him next. Blind swordsman. I love this scene when they're in the bamboo forest and they're running so next, like parallel to each other. It's really, really neat. And reminds me a little bit of the Asian character in Rogue One that uses the Force and he's blind or whatever. A little bit of maybe an echo there.
Sure,
but
yeah.
What did you think of that particular fight, that particular character?
I love, the blind swordsman. It's one of my favorite subgenres, characters that you'll see, like not only the blind swordsman, but the elegant swordsman. The one, actually, it's interesting because the Yuri Moro character sort of has that trait of, like, that's what I thought they were going with that character, where he's kind of calm and he's smelling the flowers. He's sort of like that elegant, very grounded, very, maybe like slightly feminine type warrior. Mm-hmm. But I love the blind swordsman specifically because, being able to do that thing that's almost impossible to do when you have the gift of sight. It takes a page out of, like, the famous blind swordsman fiction, things like Zatoichi, the blind samurai, and all that kind of stuff. And it's a cool thing because the whole fight is set up because Mojuru, first of all, saves Jubei and Kagero from dying, from falling off the cliff, just in order to have the duel. And unlike the other eight devils, seems to be challenging Jubei on equal footing. Like, you're a legendary swordsman, I'm a legendary swordsman, let's do this type of thing. Pretty neat. And like you said, the typical samurai duel where you're running in the bamboo forest. And Jubei knows, like, this guy's a formidable dude. Like, you could see from the beginning of the fight. And again, how luck plays into it, where Kagero tries to intervene briefly and gets her daikatana stuck in the reed in the bamboo. That's the only thing that saves Jubei from being killed. Because when Mojuro swings down, he hits that, not knowing that daikatana is stuck across, blocks the blow so Jubei could stab him in the belly and defeat him. Super ironic. And I love the fact of, like, somebody who's going to be impossible to defeat, because the only way to defeat this guy is to not make any noise. And that's impossible. Even with Jubei cutting down the bamboo and trying to, kind of cover himself with the noise of the falling leaves and everything, wasn't enough, So he would have never been able to defeat this guy hadn't that, again, that little element of luck played into it, which is interesting, again, because it's saying, like, not only is Jubei this, this consummate hero, but he also needs luck in order to win. It makes him kind of lovable in a way.
Yeah, definitely. He gets the help he needs to survive. I agree with you there. All right, let's see here. We already talked about that. So yeah, let's go to Yurimaru, the string user, electric user. Interesting kind of lieutenant character. Quite attracted to this character. I just think it's, again, very video gamey. I love the creepiness, the constant. They're really tight on his face a lot, which is kind of cool. And you see the strings, like, on his almost marionette-like. And so I really dig the design of his character. What did you think of him?
He's super cool because we get from pretty early on, it's like, why is this giant stone monster listening to this dude type of thing? So we know early on that he's in charge, or he's a force to be reckoned with, because even this giant stone monster in Tessai is listening to, he's like, stop going after him right now. Like, Tessai's enraged. Like, Jubei just poked his fucking eye out with a dagger. You know what I mean? He's out for blood, and Yorimaru's like, dude, stop. Like, you're not going after him right now, you know? And Tessai listened. So right from the beginning, you're like, who the hell is this dude? You know, he's smelling a flower, standing there in the orchard smelling a flower. Like, who is this guy? And you find out he's sort of Genma's chief lieutenant. And any character with that mystical ability to generate electricity is really interesting. You see that a lot in fiction. You see that a lot in fighting games. Obviously, we think of Blanca, right? Street Fighter.
Sure.
The fact that you could internally generate this electricity and use it for attack, and then Yorimaru does it via this thin metal cord that he uses, as Kyle mentioned, and also is able to use that as like a string in a can, like little kids do to talk to Genma. You see the string. It's a little goofy, but it's kind of cool. Like, they're using those electrical impulses to talk to each other like a phone, like a feudal Japanese cell phone service.
Right.
Kind of interesting.
Landline.
And
Yeah,
I
it is.
wonder
I agree.
if there's any historical, like, there's always a smattering of historical things. Like, this story was based on the famous ninja / samurai Yagyu Jubei, right? Like, and based on a novel about that character, sort of a cross between nursery rhyme and pop culture and fairy tale and truth, you know, actual legend and actual history. You wonder, like, with these weapons, with these various mystical abilities, like, how much of this is steeped in actual lore? Like, even if it's just some kind of myth, that's what really fascinates me about this type of stuff. It makes me want to kind of hanker down and find out more about feudal Japan. It was just fucking fascinating. You know what I mean? Like,
Certainly.
such a fascinating period. Not just the weaponry, not just the political infighting and all that kind of stuff, but just the people, the way they lived, like how they got their food, like when they started trading with other countries, like just the very briefly touched upon element of trading with countries like Spain, who were very wealthy countries or had already industry in some regard and were creating weapons and sort of projectile-based gunpowder weapons. Then it was society, or the world was kind of coming out of fighting with melee weapons and actual, you know, it was coming into the gun age with rifles and gunpowder and all that kind of stuff. Super fascinating stuff to me. Like, really wants me to get into the library, get in some books and just find out how much of this stuff is like based on actual real life. It's super, super enticing to me.
Yeah, it is to me too. I want to talk about that in a little while when we begin to wrap up, because there is something about the historical basis for things and kind of the subtleties of supernatural stuff. We talk about that a lot with our love of Game of Thrones.
Sure, that's another example. Sure.
We haven't talked about Yorimaru. Oh no, I'm sorry. Zakoro. Yeah, sorry, that's who we're on next. Zakoro, and another interesting character. I'm looking at some of this. So ninjascroll.fandom.com has a lot of cool, like, just stills, and there's just so many beautiful scenes with her in it, especially. What do you think about this particular character?
Yeah, she's a little crazy demon chick, right? She has the power to manipulate and ignite gunpowder, which I love the character, because you get this with the enemy characters. You get that there's sort of like this homosexual relationship between Genma and Yorimaru, and that we know that Zakoro has this unrequited love with Yorimaru, which we find out Yorimaru is homosexual because she's trying to throw herself at him, and he's kind of rejecting her advances. And because she's this jilted lover, she's sort of, we know early on that she's out to get Yorimaru, and Yorimaru is powerful. He serves at the right hand of Genma. So you have this whole little side story going on with these two characters. Her power was very difficult for me to understand. We know how she's done in eventually on the ship by Jubei and Dakuan later, but she seems to be able, she has this cool power of harnessing gunpowder. I like, it reminds me of almost like Mulan, Disney's Mulan, where you have this ancient civilization, it's still 100 years ago, but again, like, the era is changing. Gunpowder and rifles and that sort of weaponry is coming into the mainstream now. And it's slowly replacing bladed weapons and spears and swords and all that kind of thing. And so I like anytime there's a feudal Japanese thing dealing with early projectile weapons or maybe cannons or maybe things that are a bridge too far for actually the way it would have been in real life, but actually playing into like more modern weapons, but set in this very ancient historical time, right? I like the fact that she could sort of harness gunpowder and the fact that she is able to detonate it, but I'm assuming that she sort of is able to ignite the gunpowder probably telepathically in some way.
Yeah, presumably. Yeah, it's cool. She like makes little bombs.
She makes little bombs.
Which, right. And yeah, it seems like it's some sort of telepathic thing. Again, I think that it's very astute for the audience member earlier to just point it to Metal Gear because it just feels like that. Like everything, it just feels like a feudal Japanese Metal Gear.
Yes.
I gotta read more about that. I wonder if he's pretty open about his influences. I don't know if Kojima had talked about Ninja Scroll at all, but the final guy we need to talk about here, of course, is the big man, Genma J. Leno Hamura. What do you think of this? What do you think of this seemingly immortal character?
I love the character design. It's very, if you look at Kawajiri's work, the whole movie really speaks to his style, but one of the first things that turned me on to Kawajiri, because I wasn't really familiar with Lensman at the time, and of course his resume as an animator, he had to be a little bit of a chameleon. It wasn't his directorial sort of house style that he would later establish with Madhouse and just having his own signature. But there was an anthology film, even pre-Robot Carnival and pre-Animatrix, called, in the West, they called it Neo Tokyo. And it was 3 directors, and Kawajiri directed one of the shorts. I think it's about 12 minutes long. And it's called The Running Man. And it's about a futuristic race car driver in these very dangerous races and how he dies and how he's kind of cursed to circle this track for the rest of his life. Super cyberpunk, gorgeously animated on cells. One of them, I watched it last night again, one of the most beautifully animated, timeless things, but you could see Kawajiri's style, his character style, is very striking and very specific. And that style, harkening back to The Running Man. And the way I saw it, Kyle, was they actually played it on MTV. Just that one. All 3 shorts in Neo Tokyo are gorgeous. One's by Rintaro, one's by Kawajiri, and I'll get you the other director's name. Oh, it's Katsuhiro Otomo directs the other one. And The Running Man is one of the most beautiful things, but MTV somehow leveraged it briefly for inclusion in Liquid Television. So they played that short on Liquid Television, which is interesting because it's 12 minutes, so it was over half the show when they showed it, and that's what exposed me to Kawajiri. And when Ninja Scroll came out, I was like, that's the same guy. And you could see it specifically in Genma, that very blocky, very specific character style, very striking, a little off-putting, like you're saying, that Jay Leno chin.
Yeah.
Not really a departure from typical anime, very much like Katsuhiro Otomo in that, or Studio Ghibli, in that it doesn't look like anything else. It really is inherently a lot of its own thing. It's its own style. But Genma is awesome because I feel like he's a proper payoff. You know, he's that final boss that we're waiting to meet. Again, in watching the film progress, we see the backstory and the bad blood between Jubei and Genma, and we know it's all going to come down to this final showdown with these 2 guys. And I love that Genma, sometimes called Gemma, but I think it's Genma because if I'm not mistaken, Genma is demon.
Yeah, Genma is demon Japanese.
Right, in Japanese. Yeah. So Gemma wouldn't really make sense, but this translation calls him Gemma in the sub, which is not good. I have a lot to say about manga entertainment. I wasn't a big fan of those guys. But I love 2 things about this guy. His size is awesome. And the fact that he's sort of achieved, we find that he's sort of achieved immortality, seemingly. I think Dakuan is the one who tells Jubei this, by harnessing the power of regeneration. So you can't kill this guy. He's essentially unkillable. And in the past, because the Jubei and Genma were in the same ninja clan, and Genma betrays Jubei. So Jubei is forced through the actions of Genma to basically slay his entire clan in self-defense, ending with beheading Genma. So Jubei's like, how can he even be alive? I cut his head off myself. So apparently somewhere in the throes of time, Genma put his head back on and then got his regenerative powers. And I like the fact that he doesn't fight with a weapon. He just has that iron arm, right? Like his gauntlet that he basically defends himself, and he fights with hand and fist. Now, does he have a human arm under? Why didn't that arm grow back? I don't know. It's not important. It's just cool that he has a metal arm.
Definitely.
So super, super cool payoff. And I love the whole confrontation at the end. They don't even talk a lot. They just know it's all come down to that. They're like, this is it on the ship while the ship is burning, while it's sinking, while the gold is melting. It's a nice little showcase set piece battle at the end. And this movie is built on set piece battles, really.
Definitely another video game thing. And
absolutely.
I dig the ending too. It reminds me of the ending of another much newer game. I will not say what it is because I don't want to spoil it for people. But in watching the ending, I was like, I wonder if they watched this.
That's interesting.
But I did dig. I should say this first because I wanted to look this up just to be sure. I'm on a random college website. Genma is a transliteration of Japanese terms. Genma is widely used in various Japanese cultures. There is no single interpretation that can define the term. When written in kanji, it literally means a great illusion and generally represents the supernatural power or the person wielding such power. The literal translation of demon or devil is Akuma. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Stay your swords, weebs. Stay your swords. All right. I wanted to talk on this as well because Ramon, as I said, I was watching this with my best friend Ramon. Ramon's a professional musician. And he said like 15 or 20 minutes into the movie, he's like, this movie's sound design is nuts. And Jeff Rogers wrote in and said, hey, boys, I remember renting this movie over and over at our local video store in VHS. Finally, in the year 2000, we got a computer with a DVD-ROM and a surround sound speakers. I immediately drove to Best Buy and bought this movie because the sound design in the movie is intense.
Nice.
The whirling blades and the tree scene and full surround sound are so incredible. This was my first DVD and my experience with surround sound. I was absolutely blown away. I actually got a girlfriend because of my sweet setup and this movie.
What?
One of my favorites of all time. Can't wait to hear what you guys think of this gem. Thank you, Jeff, for writing in.
Thank you,
What
Jeff.
do you think about the sound design? It did stick out to me, too. I'm not usually a dude who notices that stuff too much, but it stood to the forefront to me. And once Ramon identified that, I was like, well, it must be the real deal. And then we got this letter from the audience that I wanted to read that, too. Did the sound design stick out to you at all?
It's beautiful. Right from the opening moment where the spear pierces the bottom of the bridge. Now, I have to say, don't watch... First of all, it's so strange to me that you could have bought that. There was an era where you could buy this in Best Buy. It's like so off my radar. It's like, having to get a pirated copy earlier on and like.
Yeah, man. Times changed. I'll tell you.
It really did. In that whole mall store, like I always think of Trigun specifically, like Trigun era of anime where you could go into like an FHE or Best Buy and buy anime. It's so interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of missed that whole period. I missed out on that whole period, really, because I was just out of it at that time. But yeah, the sound design is gorgeous. First of all, the musical score is amazing because it's really traditionally steeped in something that you think you would hear in historic feudal Japan, but it also has like a rousing cinematic, I don't know, like deepening to it, where it's like, it's kind of brought up a couple of levels in almost a modern day cinematic movie theater way, but not in a way that offends or seems like out of period where it's like all of a sudden it's metal or hard rock. Like it still seems appropriate for the time, but it's just kind of brought up. It's just kind of lifted a little bit, which I love. And the sound design is just gorgeous from the weaponry to the elemental stuff to footsteps. It's a cut above most anime that you would hear, maybe even cinematically. But I have to say, for you guys, don't watch the manga video dub of the sound because it's very garbled. It seems like the whole thing is like underwater or brought down a couple of notches in level. Like it seems like it's like it echoes a little bit. It's strange. So if you can watch the sub or watch it like Colin did on Hulu, I think you'd be better off than watching it on DVD. I think there's got to be a Blu-ray of this as well.
I'm sure there is. I was a little confused by the Hulu one, though, because it's in 4:3. The movie certainly isn't in 4:3.
Oh, it's in 4:3.
Right?
Yeah, that's
because when I was watching, I was like, was this made for TV or something? That's I was like kind of confused because it wasn't even letterboxed or anything. So
yeah,
I'm not even sure that I saw like the full, but that was the only version that was available on streaming services. Because I did PlayStation's, universal search, which I love.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that came up for me. I couldn't even buy it like a la carte on Amazon.
That's
so
such a nice
I
feature.
like to buy things a la carte when I can, just to kind of show a little bit of support, but I wasn't able to do that. Now, Dig, I wanted to wrap up talking a little bit more about one of the things you had brought up earlier, and it's kind of the thematic nature of the movie. And by the way, quick shout out to the sound of the staff, like the jingling staff.
Oh, so cool.
I love that.
Did you know those staves? Hold on, I'm going to tell you the name of that staff.
Okay. It's a weapon, right? Is it a type of weapon?
It's called a shakujo.
Ooh.
And it's a staff with rings. Traditionally, I think it was a Buddhist priest or Buddhist monk type thing, but I read about it that those rings were designed. It was designed for combat, but also to ward off wild animals when you were walking or hiking. So that sound was made to ward off, like, I think it's also called like a tiger staff, because people used it to ward off that sound would be off-putting to an animal and make them run away, which I never knew.
Interesting.
Which is super fascinating, because you see
cool.
that, you see those in every martial arts film of the 80s and 90s, Hell's Wind staff and all that kind of stuff. So it was cool to get a little piece of like supposed actual history behind it.
Yeah, very nice. I wanted to just give that a quick shout out as well. But I think the biggest thing that stood out to me, other than just the myriad video game parallels, which we've gone into depth about, is what you had brought up earlier, which is this really interesting thematic marriage of feudal Japan before the West broke them open, Commodore Perry and all that in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, as everything kind of started getting broken out over there. And the mild, well, it's a little more, it's moderate maybe in this, but a mild to moderate supernatural element. There's something really interesting about that. And I think I said on a recent episode that I've always been fascinated by the thematic and fictional potential of like an American Revolutionary War story told where Native Americans have some sort of arcane power that they're either use or protect or are trying to obfuscate the existence of. And there's just something really great about that, because I love things that feel grounded, but certainly aren't, but take themselves pretty seriously. Like, this movie's not corny or campy.
No, I agree.
And that is a different sort of thing. Like Metal Gear Solid, I think even is campy.
Yes.
This didn't seem campy. And I think that they really threaded the needle really nicely here. I'm wondering, as we close out, if you have any further thoughts on that, because I just think that's such an awesome way to enhance a world, is to familiarize a person with the world, but say like there are elements of this world that will surprise you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really cool because it makes it its own character, basically.
Absolutely. It's a hard balancing act too, when you're trying to make something cool and grounded and just compelling without crossing over into that corny territory or campy territory, unless that campiness is intended, like so often we think it is in Kojima works, for instance. I love drawing this whole thing up to Kojima. And yeah, this movie does it really well. There's one very brief corny spot in the last 10 minutes of the movie where Jubei's, I don't want to ruin it, Jubei's avenging at the end, right? Because I want you guys to watch it that haven't watched it. And he puts on the headband, you know what it is, and he rips his sleeves off. There was absolutely no reason to rip his sleeves off his gi, right? Or his robes. Right. It was ridiculous. It was like, I get the Rambo. First of all, I love when the Japanese reference Western pop culture in some way. And sometimes they take it really far, in an admiration sort of way. We see that so much with like Blade Runner, for instance. They'll just leverage Blade Runner in their content, anime or live action, whatever, in just the most obvious, unapologetic way, but it's always in reverence to it. It never feels like it's parodying. It feels like a loving nod. Sure. But the Rambo thing with the headband I got, but he didn't have to rip his sleeves off his robe. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a bridge too far for you.
It's a bridge too far. But that, for the most part, it's great. Like, and I love the fact that, again, all the mysticism and all the so-called ninja magic is kind of believable. Manipulating wild creatures or insects or poppy poppy
it's
petals.
naturalism. It's like a level of naturalism that makes sense.
I mean, I love that. And you know what the other thing is, Kyle? I love drawing up this discussion and tying it in with video games, because that was a big bullet point in my notes. And I think it's important to talk about in pop culture too, because like you said, there's that chicken and egg effect. But I think we have to think back even to things. I wrote down a couple of things that would inspire this sort of boss battle level set piece mini boss leading up to the big boss model. And there's a couple other things I thought about. There's that older kung fu flick that was really referential in Wu-Tang's content called The Five Deadly Venoms, where it was like these 5 characters each leveraging a different animal's abilities, right? And then you have something even in a Western flick, Big Trouble in Little China, sort of had that model too, where it's like you were going through the various lieutenants, or even something like we covered on the show already, like The Warriors, where it was like some sort of, and that was in the 70s, some sort of progression to get to your goal, in that case, to get home, have to fight through these different neighborhoods, these different gangs to get to your, and then, finally face that ultimate big baddie at the end, which was the gang member that betrayed them into, would-be murderers when they didn't do it. So there's all those referential things that I wonder how those things played into, coming out of the 1-bit Atari games and coming into 8-bit games, where the boss thing started to really take effect. Like, how many of those 8-bit games or those Japanese game companies largely leveraged the entertainment that already existed in the 70s and 80s for that thing. So it is interesting. And then you think about this, you think about anime, you think about big things like Ninja Scroll, and then you think about huge, things that sold millions and millions of copies, like Kojima games, and how, it kind of brought along. And, Kojima's interesting. He's fascinating too, because he'll talk about on his social media about the things that are inspiring him at the moment, whether it's a piece of music, an album. He talks about food a lot, talks about film a lot. He'll talk about a television series. He's really into foreign film. He seems like a pretty filmic dude. Like, he's obviously pretty steeped in culture and pop culture. So, you could always it's interesting to kind of track that thing from all the heavies, Kawajiri, Katsuhiro Otomo, Kojima, what's Miyamoto looking at when he designs a game. So it's kind of cool how everything fuels everything, and how it's also kind of global. It's not just beholden to Japanese video game and anime. It's sort of everybody's, it's got its tendrils, it's its tentacles and everything. Not its testicles.
Please don't get that.
It doesn't have its testicles in it.
Please don't get involved in that. We don't want that. Are there any other closing comments, Dave, before we wrap up our discussion about 1993's Ninja Scroll?
You know what? It's so funny. Like, Ninja Scroll sort of came to me in my life, earlier than a lot of people in the West discovered it. But I'm not bragging. I only mean to say that as it was kind of like a confluence of media at the time, and everything seemed to be taking a page out of this. Like, I think about Neo Geo's or SNK's Samurai Showdown series, where you could see the Samurai Showdown games very similar in tone and style to Ninja Scroll, where you have these grounded samurai, feudal Japanese type characters, and then it's kind of paired with this mysticism, technology a little bit, maybe, a little sci-fi in order to excel that out of the period of feudal Japan and just make it a little more fantasy. Like, I think of like the crossover between those two things. Like, you think of a character like Shijima and how much he reminds you of Ganon from the Samurai Showdown games. And there's even a little Easter egg in this that I discovered a long time ago, where it's the scene where Kagero is cutting her top knot off in the dojo, and she's saying she's going to go out on the mission, and the other ninja are trying to compel her to stay because her important role is a poison tester, and she cuts off her hair and she's like, I'm coming with you on this mission or whatever. There's a little Easter egg. Yagyu Jubei, who is the eye-patched samurai who fights with 2 katanas in the Samurai Showdown games, he's sitting in, he's one of the characters sitting in the dojo or in the house while Kagaro's kind of lashing out at the rest of the
That's
clan.
super interesting. And so that's like a confirmed thing that like,
no, I don't think it's even a confirmed thing, but it's the same character. It's the eye patches on the same eye. It's the same gray robes. He doesn't say anything. He's just an extra basically. But why would he be in there? And then there's that character, Caffeine Nicotine, who's like the Buddhist priest or Buddhist monk who looks exactly like Dakuan. You know, he has the big hat, the big straw hat, the staff. So it's really interesting to see those cultural crossovers again with video games and anime and manga. You know, that everything was sort of, and I guess that's just the kind of the way it ebbs and flows stylistically. You know, there's trends like in everything. And but it's interesting to go back and look at the early to mid 90s and see all of that taking place. You can even see that in Capcom's games with Street Fighter and certain character traits, certain physicality that they put in
and
there,
of course,
maybe proportions.
Of course, Dan is as a joke character in the other direction.
Dan, the famous nod to, it was super. This was a fun topic because, and I'm really grateful that we got so many write-ins about it too, because this is one of the ones that is like you said earlier, a little less obvious of those mainstream anime movies. And I often wonder too, like I was already an anime guy before and after this film came, but I definitely saw it put anime on the map of people that maybe weren't fans prior. But I wonder, like, this is a special type of film in terms not only of quality, and I think that imparts a certain timelessness, but also in terms of content, right? It deals, again, very deftly with feudal Japan, but imparts those sort of fantasy elements, the mysticism, but also the sex and violence. And I wonder if people sort of got into anime via a film like this. Same thing with Akira, right? It would be a similar thing. And then said, okay, like I want to consume more anime. Like I'm in, like let me do the next thing. And the next things weren't quite the same in terms of quality or content. And if a lot of people sort of, their kind of brief flirtation with anime only lasted as far as this movie, and finding out like all anime is not like this. You know what I mean? Maybe it was a gateway for them, a gateway drug into anime, and they were all in for what they discovered. But maybe, I can't help but thinking, like, maybe it was a disappointment to discover the next thing because it wasn't quite up to the standard of content or quality of a Ninja Scroll or Akira. I would love to find out more about that from people who maybe thought they were in, but they were like, oh no, like 99% of the things I'm discovering are not up to, you know, quality or content of the things that I'm looking for in this, where, you know, maybe everybody's like, this is super metal, like sex and violence and everything. And then the next anime series was overly cutesy or, you know, much less quality in the animation, shorter, episodic. Maybe it was too much of a time investment to get into a whole series, even an OAV series. So I wonder about that, you know, where it was like, you were along for the ride as a young kid because you were already subjected to it in your own living room. But I wonder about that, you know, where it was like, you know, and now you could get away with so much more. It was like X-rated anime was like a thing. I had that on my lists from the pirates that I got these things from. But now X-rated anime is, you know, you can watch it on Funimation and shit. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to know how much anime's changed, and having this conversation and writing the notes and sort of getting ready for this and prepping for this also got me thinking what's going to be next. Like, we got to do Ghost in the Shell eventually. But then it's a hard thing because I want it to be I can't just do something that's more niche or more obscure. Like these topics for KnockBack, I feel like have to have some sort of, you know, place in the mainstream-ish or be influential, a certain degree of influential in some way. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go after a thing like Ghost in the Shell. But I highly recommend you guys go out and watch this and Neo Tokyo, the anthology film that I was talking about earlier with Runtaro, Kawajiri, and Katsuhiro Otomo. I mean, all three shorts are like, they'll blow your mind. They're so good. And something that came out in the late 80s, I believe. Dude, they're unbelievable. And you could even watch on YouTube. That's where we're at now.
Yeah.
You know?
That is where we're at. Very exciting. Well, I'm glad we did this topic. It was good to watch the film in whole. I hope people out there enjoy it. Dagan gave you a lot of options of what to watch. And if you want to watch Ninja Scroll, you can do so on Hulu. But if you want to go watch the Blu-ray or DVD, you'll have to track that down yourself. Dagan, as we always do, let's end our episode of KnockBack with a dad joke.
A dad joke. Let's go, my friend. Kyle, why do dogs float in water?
I don't know.
Because they are good buoys.
That's ridiculous.
I love that one. I'm so thrilled. You know, you think after a few years of doing the show, doing a dad joke every episode or two, that you're going to run out of dad jokes. I'm going to tell you right now, there is no end to dad jokes.
No.
We could do this show for 300 years and we're not going to end it. So be grateful. Something to be happy about in these uncertain days. You know, look forward to the dad jokes is what I'm saying to you.
Sure.
You know,
embrace it. Appreciate that. Dave, thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support of all of our topics here and the care you put into these things that people really love, especially these animation jump-ins. And of course, thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of our show, all things Last Stand Media and KnockBack. That's it. That's all we have. We'll see you on Patreon. Watch us on YouTube. Watch on or listen on podcast services. Leave us nice reviews. You can always tweet at us, DM us on Patreon, etc. We'll see you next time for more KnockBack. Until then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.